The leather-bound volume of Shakespeare's sonnets slipped from Eleanor Hartwell's fingers and landed in the dirt of Redemption's Main Street, trampled within seconds by a passing horse that sent dust swirling across the pages she had been reading just moments before. "Look at Miss High and Mighty with her fancy books," called out Virgil Tucker from the porch of the saloon, his voice carrying across the dusty thoroughfare of the small Wyoming town in the summer of 1878. "Ain't no use for all that reading when there's real work to be done." Eleanor's cheeks burned as she bent to retrieve her book, brushing away the grime that now marred the cover her father had given her before consumption took him 2 years prior. The laughter of the men outside the saloon echoed in her ears, mixing with the jeers from the women gathered near the mercantile who whispered behind their hands about how she thought herself better than everyone else. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the book to her chest, the familiar weight of it providing small comfort against the sting of their mockery. "Reading stories won't help you catch a husband, girl," added Martha Weaver, the banker's wife, her voice dripping with false concern. "No man wants a woman with her nose always stuck in a book." Eleanor straightened her spine and lifted her chin, refusing to let them see how their words cut into her. At 22 years old, she had heard every variation of their criticisms. She was too educated for a frontier town. She was wasting her time with literature when she should be focusing on needlework and cooking. She was setting a poor example for the younger girls who might get ideas above their station. The fact that she ran the town's small schoolhouse, teaching the children their letters and numbers, seemed to matter little to those who believed a woman's worth lay solely in her ability to maintain a home and produce children. She turned away from the main street and walked quickly toward the modest wooden building that served as both schoolhouse and her living quarters. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her dark hair, which she had pinned up that morning in a simple style that kept the heavy mass off her neck. Her calico dress, faded from washing but clean and carefully mended, swished around her ankles as she climbed the 3 steps to the schoolhouse door. Inside, the single room was blessedly cool, protected from the worst of the summer heat by thick walls and small windows. Rows of desks sat empty now that school had let out for the day, and Eleanor's own small collection of books lined a makeshift shelf along one wall. She had perhaps 30 volumes in total, accumulated through years of careful saving and the occasional gift from traveling merchants who passed through Redemption on their way to larger cities. Each one was precious to her, a window into worlds beyond the harsh reality of frontier life. She set the Shakespeare on her desk and examined the damage. The cover was scuffed and one corner bent, but the pages remained intact. She could repair it with some careful pressing and perhaps a bit of leather oil. As she worked to smooth out the bent corner, she heard the door open behind her. "Miss Hartwell." The voice was deep and unfamiliar, with a slight roughness that suggested years spent outdoors. Eleanor turned to find a man standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat that fell past his collar. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore the typical garb of a cowboy: denim trousers worn soft with age, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing tanned forearms, and a leather vest that had seen better days. His hat, which he removed as he stepped inside, showed the sweat stains of hard work, and his boots carried the dust of the trail. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it, though his hand stayed well away from the weapon. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell," she said, setting the book down and wiping her palms on her skirt. "May I help you?" He took another step inside, his movements careful and deliberate as though he was worried about spooking her. "Name's Cole Brennan. I just signed on with the Rocking H Ranch about 5 miles outside town. I heard tell you're the teacher here." Eleanor nodded slowly, uncertain where this conversation was heading. Cole Brennan appeared to be in his mid-20s, with the lean, muscular build of a man who made his living through physical labor. There was something guarded in his expression, a wariness that suggested he had known hardship, but his eyes held an earnestness that made her want to trust him. "I am the teacher, yes. Though school won't resume until September after the harvest, if you have children who need instruction, I would be happy to discuss their enrollment." "No children, ma'am, it's not that." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and Eleanor realized with surprise that this confident-looking cowboy was nervous. "I saw what happened out there on the street, heard what they said to you." Her cheeks flamed again, and she looked away. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Brennan, but there's no need to mention it. People in Redemption have strong opinions about how a woman should spend her time." "They're fools," he said bluntly, and her gaze snapped back to his face. "I mean no disrespect, but anyone who mocks learning is a fool in my book." Eleanor studied him more carefully, taking in the details she had missed in her initial assessment. His hands, though calloused and scarred from rope work and hard labor, were clean. His fingernails were trimmed neatly. Despite the worn state of his clothing, everything was mended and cared for. There was a quality to him that suggested he took pride in himself and his work. "That's a kind thing to say, Mr. Brennan, but I suspect you're in the minority around here." He took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "Miss Hartwell, I came here to ask you something, and I'll understand if you say no. But I saw you with that book, and I heard how you spoke to those people with such confidence even though they were being cruel, and I thought maybe you might be willing to help me." "Help you with what?" Cole Brennan drew in a deep breath, his chest expanding beneath the worn chambray. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "I can't read, Miss Hartwell. Never learned how. My parents died when I was just a boy, and I've been working cattle ranches since I was 8 years old. I can cipher numbers well enough to count my wages, and I can write my name, but that's about the extent of it. I've gotten by this long without it, but lately I've been thinking that maybe I'm missing something important. When I saw you standing there with that book, looking like it was the most valuable thing in the world, I thought maybe you could teach me." Eleanor's heart squeezed in her chest. She had met plenty of illiterate adults in her time as a teacher. On the frontier, formal education was a luxury many could not afford, and there was no shame in not knowing how to read. But she had never met anyone who expressed such clear desire to learn, especially not a grown man who freely admitted his lack of knowledge to a woman he had just met. "You want me to teach you to read?" "Yes, ma'am. I know it's a lot to ask, and I know you probably don't have much time, but I'm a quick study when I put my mind to something. I'd be willing to pay you for your time, of course. Not much, but whatever I can spare from my wages." Eleanor shook her head immediately. "I wouldn't dream of taking your money, Mr. Brennan. If you truly want to learn, I would be honored to teach you." The smile that broke across his face transformed him completely. The wariness disappeared, replaced by a joy so pure and unguarded that Eleanor felt an answering warmth bloom in her own chest. "You mean it. You'll really teach me." "Of course I will. It's what I do." "Thank you, Miss Hartwell. Truly." He twisted his hat in his hands, the brim rotating through his fingers. "I work most days from dawn until dusk, but I have Sundays off and sometimes Saturday evenings. Would either of those times suit you?" Eleanor considered her own schedule. Sundays she typically attended church services in the morning and then spent the afternoon in quiet pursuits, reading or preparing lessons for the coming school term. Saturday evenings were similarly unoccupied, as she rarely participated in the social gatherings at the saloon or the occasional dances held in the town hall. "Sunday afternoons would work well," she said. "Shall we say 2 o'clock? That would give you time to attend services and have a meal before our lessons." "That would be perfect. I'll be here this Sunday then." He placed his hat back on his head and tipped it to her in farewell. "Thank you again, Miss Hartwell. You don't know what this means to me." Please, call me Eleanor. If we're to be student and teacher, there's no need for such formality. Only if you call me Cole. Agreed. He left then, pulling the door closed behind him with a gentle click. Eleanor stood in the empty schoolroom, her mind whirling with this unexpected development. She moved to the window and watched as Cole Brennan mounted a sturdy bay horse tied to the hitching post outside. He sat his horse with the ease of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on foot, his body moving in natural rhythm with the animal's gait as they headed out of town toward the rocking H. Eleanor turned back to her desk and picked up the damaged Shakespeare, running her fingers over the scuffed cover. For the first time since the incident in the street, she smiled. Let the people of redemption mock her all they wanted. She had just gained a student who actually wanted to learn, who saw value in the knowledge she had to offer. That was worth more than all their approval combined. The week passed slowly. Eleanor went about her usual routines, tending to her small garden behind the schoolhouse, visiting the mercantile for supplies, and spending long hours reading in the relative cool of early morning and late evening. She carefully avoided the main street during the busiest parts of the day, unwilling to subject herself to more ridicule. The other women of redemption continued to treat her with cool politeness at best and outright disdain at worst, while the men either ignored her entirely or made crude comments about what she needed to loosen up. Only Josephine Martinez, the Mexican woman who ran the boarding house, showed her any real kindness. Josephine was nearly 60, with silver threading through her black hair and deep lines bracketing her warm brown eyes. She had come to redemption 30 years earlier with her husband, who had worked as a blacksmith until his death 5 years ago. Now she supported herself by providing clean rooms and good meals to travelers and the handful of permanent residents who had no families of their own. "You look different," Josephine said on Saturday afternoon when Eleanor stopped by to drop off some mended linens that Josephine had asked her to repair. "Something good has happened." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. She had not told anyone about Cole Brennan's request, partly because she did not want to betray his confidence and partly because she knew the gossips of redemption would find some way to twist it into something unseemly. But Josephine had always been trustworthy, and Eleanor found herself wanting to share her excitement with someone. "I have a new student," she said, keeping her voice low even though they were alone in Josephine's kitchen. "An adult student who wants to learn to read." Josephine's face lit up with pleasure. "This is wonderful. Who is this person?" "Cole Brennan. He just started working at the Rocking H." "Ah, yes. He is staying here at the boarding house until he can save enough for his own place. He is a good man, that one. Quiet, respectful. Always thanks me for his meals and keeps his room neat." Josephine studied Eleanor with knowing eyes. "And handsome too, no, Josephine," Eleanor protested, but she could not help the smile that tugged at her lips. "What? I am old, not blind." "That man is built like a statue and has eyes that could melt butter. And now he is going to spend time with you every week, learning his letters. This is very romantic." "It's nothing like that. He simply wants an education." Of course. "But still, a young man and a young woman spending time together sharing knowledge. These things have a way of developing into something more." Josephine patted Eleanor's hand. "You are a good woman, Eleanor. You deserve someone who sees your worth. Maybe this Cole Brennan is that person." Eleanor left the boarding house with her mind spinning. She had not thought of Cole's request in romantic terms at all. He was simply a student, someone who needed her help. But Josephine's words had planted a seed of possibility that she could not quite shake. What if there was more to his interest than just learning to read? What if he felt the same strange pull she had experienced when he walked into the schoolhouse? She shook her head firmly as she climbed the steps to her own door. She was being ridiculous. Cole Brennan was a cowboy who worked hard for his wages and wanted to improve himself. That was all. The fact that he was remarkably handsome and had shown her more respect in 5 minutes than most of the town had shown her in years was simply coincidence. She would teach him to read, he would gain a valuable skill, and that would be the end of it. But that night, as she prepared her lessons for the next day, she found herself taking extra care with her appearance. She washed her hair and dried it by the fire until it shone, then braided it loosely so it would hold soft waves the next day. She laid out her best dress, a pale blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered at the collar and cuffs. It was still simple by the standards of city fashion, but it was the nicest thing she owned, and she wanted to look professional for her first lesson with Cole. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that promised some relief from the oppressive heat. Eleanor attended the church service as usual, sitting in the back pew and keeping her eyes down as the reverend droned on about the dangers of pride and vanity. She wondered if he was directing his sermon at her, but when she glanced up, his gaze was sweeping over the entire congregation without particular focus. After the service, she hurried home and heated water for a quick wash. She changed into the blue dress and left her hair down, held back from her face with 2 simple combs. A glance in the small mirror over her washstand showed a young woman with dark brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, gray-green eyes that were perhaps a bit too serious, and fair skin dusted with a handful of freckles across her nose. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but she was pleasant enough to look at, and the blue of the dress brought out the color in her eyes. At precisely 2 o'clock, she heard boots on the wooden steps outside. She opened the door before Cole could knock and found him standing there with his hat in his hands, looking nervous and hopeful in equal measure. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance as well. His shirt was pressed, his hair was combed back and still damp from washing, and he had shaved, revealing the strong line of his jaw. "Good afternoon, Cole. Please come in." "Afternoon, Eleanor. I hope I'm not too early. You're right on time." She had set up one of the student desks for him, positioned near her own desk, where she could easily see his work and provide guidance. On the desk, she had placed a slate and chalk, a primer designed for young children but still serviceable for teaching the basics, and a sheet of paper on which she had written the alphabet in both capital and lowercase letters. Cole sat down at the desk, his long legs barely fitting in the space designed for children. The sight was somewhat comical, this grown man folding himself into a child's desk, but there was nothing funny about the intensity with which he studied the materials she had laid out. "We'll start with the alphabet," Eleanor said, pulling her chair around so she sat beside him rather than across from him. "You said you can write your name. Can you show me?" Cole picked up the chalk and carefully wrote on the slate, "Cole Brennan." The letters were shaky and uneven, formed with obvious effort, but they were legible. "That's very good," Eleanor said encouragingly. "You already know how to make all these letters. Now we just need to teach you what sounds they represent and how they combine to form words." She began with the letter A, explaining how it could make different sounds depending on the word. Cole listened with fierce concentration, his eyes fixed on her face as she spoke, occasionally darting to the slate where she wrote examples. When she asked him to practice writing the letter and saying its sounds, he did so with a care that suggested each stroke of chalk was precious. They worked through the first few letters of the alphabet, and Eleanor was impressed by how quickly Cole caught on. He had not been boasting when he said he was a quick study. He seemed to absorb information effortlessly, making connections between letters and sounds without needing much repetition. His questions were thoughtful and showed he was really thinking about the material rather than just memorizing it by rote. "You're doing wonderfully," Eleanor said after about an hour of work. "I think we should take a break. Would you like some water? I have lemonade as well." "Lemonade sounds mighty good, thank you." Eleanor fetched 2 glasses and the pitcher of lemonade she had made that morning, using the precious lemons she had splurged on at the mercantile. She poured for both of them and settled back into her chair, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. She could smell the clean scent of soap on his skin and the faint hint of leather and horses that seemed to cling to him. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said after taking a long drink of lemonade. Of course. Why do you care so much about books? I mean, I understand wanting to read for practical purposes, but you looked like that book those folks knocked out of your hands was worth more than gold. Why is that? Eleanor considered the question, trying to find words to explain something that felt as natural to her as breathing. Books are doorways, she said finally. Each one opens onto a different world, a different time, different people and ideas. When I read, I'm not stuck in this little town where everyone thinks they know exactly who I should be and how I should act. I can be anywhere, anyone. I can learn about places I'll never visit and understand people I'll never meet. Books make me feel less alone. Cole nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I think I understand that. I've spent most of my life moving from place to place, never really belonging anywhere. Maybe that's why I want to learn to read. I want to feel connected to something bigger than just the next ranch or the next herd of cattle. Then you're learning for exactly the right reasons. They talked for another hour, the lesson forgotten as they shared stories about their lives. Cole told her about growing up as an orphan, bouncing between ranches where he worked for his keep, and learned the skills that now made him valuable as a ranch hand. He spoke of sleeping under the stars more often than under a roof, of brutal winters and scorching summers, of the loneliness that came from never having a place to truly call home. Eleanor in turn told him about her childhood in St. Louis, where her father had been a clerk at a law office and her mother had taken in sewing to supplement the family income. She described how her father had loved learning and had taught her to read when she was just 4 years old, fostering in her the same passion for books that he possessed. When her mother died of fever when Eleanor was 12, her father had sold everything they owned and moved them west, hoping the drier climate would help his own failing health. It had not, and he had died 2 years after they arrived in Redemption, leaving Eleanor with a small savings, a collection of books, and the job teaching at the schoolhouse. So we're both orphans, Cole said, both looking for a place to belong. I suppose we are. Maybe we can help each other with that. There was something in his voice, a warmth and sincerity that made Eleanor's heart beat faster. She met his eyes and saw in them a reflection of her own loneliness, her own desperate hope for connection. Without thinking about it, she reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the desk. His skin was warm and rough beneath her palm, and she felt him turn his hand to lace his fingers with hers. I would like that very much, she whispered. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, eyes locked, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Cole gently squeezed her fingers and released her hand, sitting back with a small smile. I should probably get going. It'll be dark soon and I need to get back to the ranch. But I'll be here next Sunday, same time. I'll be here. Eleanor walked him to the door and watched as he mounted his horse and rode away, lifting one hand in farewell before he disappeared around the corner. She closed the door and leaned against it, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was still racing. Something had changed in the past few hours, some fundamental shift in how she saw Cole Brennan and how she saw her own future. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she did not have to face her life alone. The next week passed in a blur of anticipation. Eleanor found herself constantly distracted, her mind wandering to Cole during her daily tasks. She wondered what he was doing, whether he was practicing his letters, whether he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. When she went into town, she felt the stares and whispers of the townspeople less keenly, buoyed by the memory of Cole's hand in hers and the promise of seeing him again. On Thursday afternoon, as she was working in her garden pulling weeds from around her tomato plants, she heard a commotion from the main street. Curious, she stood and wiped the dirt from her hands, then walked around to the front of the schoolhouse to see what was happening. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, their voices raised in argument. As Eleanor watched, she saw Cole among them, his face set in hard lines. Virgil Tucker, The same man who had mocked her the week before stood opposite Cole with his arms crossed and a sneer on his face. "I'm just saying a man who can't even read his own name isn't worth the wages Harrington pays him," Virgil was saying, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Maybe if you spent less time sniffing around the schoolteacher and more time doing your job, you'd be worth keeping on." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Someone must have seen Cole visiting her, and now the gossip had spread. She started to walk toward the group, not sure what she intended to do but knowing she needed to intervene before things escalated. "My ability to read or not read has nothing to do with how well I do my job," Cole said evenly, though Eleanor could hear the tension in his voice. "And I'll thank you to keep Miss Hartwell's name out of your mouth." "Touched a nerve, did I? What's the matter, Brennan?" "Embarrassed that everyone knows you're as ignorant as a mule." Cole's hands clenched into fists, and Eleanor broke into a run. She pushed through the circle of men and placed herself between Cole and Virgil, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. "That's enough," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Mr. Tucker, you should be ashamed of yourself, mocking a man for trying to better himself. Cole is learning to read because he's intelligent enough to know that education is valuable, which is more than I can say for half the people in this town." Virgil's face flushed red. "Now hold on just a minute. No, you hold on. I am tired of this town's small-mindedness and cruelty. Cole came to me asking for help and I'm giving it to him. There's nothing shameful about that, and if you had any sense, you would admire his determination rather than belittle him for it." The crowd had grown larger, and Eleanor was aware of dozens of eyes on her. She did not care. She was done staying quiet and accepting the town's judgment. She felt Cole's hand on her elbow, steadying her, and she drew strength from his presence. "Eleanor," Cole said quietly, "let's go, he's not worth it." She wanted to argue, wanted to keep defending him, but she saw the wisdom in his words. Virgil Tucker was a bully and a fool, and nothing she said would change that. She nodded and allowed Cole to lead her away from the crowd. They walked in silence back to the schoolhouse, and once they were inside with the door closed, Cole turned to her with an expression she could not quite read. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I can fight my own battles." "I know you can, but I wanted to. I'm tired of people like Virgil Tucker thinking they can say whatever they want without consequences. You made yourself a target standing up for me like that. They're going to talk. Let them talk. I don't care anymore." Cole smiled then, a slow, warm smile that made her knees weak. "You're something else, Eleanor Hartwell. You know that? I could say the same about you, Cole Brennan." He took a step closer to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with a gentleness that made her breath catch. She saw the question in his eyes, the uncertainty, and she answered it by rising up on her toes and closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft and sweet, a tentative exploration that sent warmth flooding through Eleanor's entire body. Cole's lips were gentle against hers, his hands cradling her face as though she were something precious and fragile. She gripped the front of his shirt, anchoring herself as the world seemed to tilt and spin around her. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers and let out a shaky laugh. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I walked into this schoolhouse." "I'm glad you finally did. Eleanor, I need you to know something. I didn't come to you just because I wanted to learn to read. I mean, I do want that desperately, but the moment I saw you standing in that street holding your book like it was a treasure, standing up to those people even though you were hurt and angry, I knew I had to know you. You're brave and smart and kind, and I've never met anyone like you." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her that way before, with such raw honesty and admiration. "Cole, I feel the same way about you. You make me feel seen in a way I never have before. You don't think I'm strange or wrong for loving books. You don't want me to change who I am. Why would I want you to change? You're perfect exactly as you are. They kissed again, deeper this time, with more confidence. Eleanor's hands slid up to link behind Cole's neck and his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She could feel the solid strength of his body, the warmth of him seeping through the layers of fabric between them. It felt right in a way nothing else ever had, as though she had been waiting her whole life for this moment, for this man. When they finally broke apart again, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky outside the windows in shades of orange and pink. Cole reluctantly stepped back, though he kept hold of one of Eleanor's hands. "I should go," he said regretfully, "but I meant what I said. I want to keep learning to read and I want to keep seeing you, if you'll have me." "Of course I'll have you. Come back Sunday and we'll continue your lessons. And maybe spend a little less time on the alphabet and a little more time on this." He leaned in and kissed her once more, quick and playful. Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure joy that felt foreign after so many months of loneliness. "Maybe we can find time for both." Over the following weeks, Eleanor and Cole fell into a pattern. Every Sunday afternoon, Cole would arrive at the schoolhouse for his reading lesson, and they would spend an hour or two working through the alphabet, simple words, and eventually basic sentences. Cole was an exceptional student, progressing far faster than Eleanor would have expected. He practiced diligently between their sessions, often staying up late by lantern light in his room at the boarding house, writing letters and sounding out words until they became second nature. But the lessons were only part of their time together. After they finished with the educational portion of the afternoon, they would talk for hours, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears. Cole told her about his plans to someday own his own ranch, a small spread where he could raise horses and maybe some cattle, build a house with his own hands, and finally put down roots. Eleanor shared her secret dream of one day opening a real school with multiple classrooms and teachers, where children could receive a comprehensive education regardless of their family's financial situation. They also spent time simply being together, enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Cole would help her with chores around the schoolhouse, fixing a loose board here or carrying water from the well. Eleanor would read to him, choosing passages from her favorite books and watching his face light up as he began to understand the magic contained in those pages. Their relationship did not go unnoticed. The people of Redemption had plenty to say about the schoolteacher, and the cowboy who spent their Sundays together behind closed doors. The gossip ranged from knowing speculation to outright scandal, with several of the town's more righteous citizens suggesting that Eleanor should be dismissed from her position for setting such a poor example. Josephine Martinez, however, was delighted. "I told you," she said to Eleanor one day when Eleanor stopped by to return some borrowed thread. "I told you this would turn into something romantic. That man is in love with you. Anyone with eyes can see it." "It's still early days," Eleanor protested, though she could not keep the smile off her face. "We've only been courting for a few weeks. Time does not matter when it is right. My husband proposed to me after knowing me for 2 weeks, and we had 40 happy years together before God took him home." When you know, you know. Eleanor thought about Josephine's words as she walked back to the schoolhouse. Did she know? Was what she felt for Cole truly love, or was it just the intoxication of new romance and the relief of finally having someone who understood her? But every time she saw Cole, every time he smiled at her or took her hand or kissed her with that combination of tenderness and passion that made her head spin, she felt more certain. This was real. This was lasting. This was love. One Saturday evening in late August, Cole surprised her by arriving at the schoolhouse outside their usual meeting time. Eleanor was washing dishes after her simple dinner when she heard his knock. She opened the door to find him standing there with a picnic basket and a somewhat sheepish expression. "I know it's not Sunday," he said, "but I thought maybe we could take a ride out to the creek. There's a spot I found that I think you'd like. We could watch the sunset." Eleanor's heart melted. "That sounds wonderful. Just let me get my shawl." They rode together on Cole's bay horse, Eleanor sitting side saddle in front of him with his arms around her holding the reins. The position put them in close contact, her back against his chest, and she reveled in the intimacy of it. The horse carried them steadily away from town, following a path that wound through scrubby grassland and stands of cottonwood trees. The creek Cole had mentioned was more of a small river, running clear and cool over smooth stones. Willows grew along its banks, their trailing branches creating a natural canopy that filtered the late afternoon sunlight into dancing patterns on the water. Cole helped Eleanor down from the horse and then spread a blanket on the grass in the shade of the largest willow. "This is beautiful," Eleanor said, turning in a slow circle to take in the view. The town was not visible from here, hidden by a rise in the land, and they might have been the only two people in the world. "I found it a few weeks back when I was checking fence lines. I've been waiting for the right time to show you." Cole opened the basket and began unpacking its contents: fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of cider. "It's not fancy, but I thought we could share a meal." They ate and talked as the sun sank lower in the sky, painting everything in warm, golden light. Eleanor told Cole about her plans for the coming school term, the lessons she wanted to teach, and the improvements she hoped to make to the schoolhouse. Cole shared stories about the horses he was training at the Rocking H, describing their different personalities with obvious affection. When the food was gone and the sky had deepened to shades of purple and indigo, Cole reached into the basket one more time and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. He handed it to Eleanor with a mix of pride and nervousness on his face. "I got you something. It's not much, but I saw it and thought of you." Eleanor untied the string with trembling fingers and folded back the paper to reveal a book. Not just any book, but a beautiful leather-bound edition of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, its cover embossed with gold lettering and its pages edged in gilt. She gasped and looked up at Cole with tears in her eyes. "Cole, this is too much. This must have cost you." "It doesn't matter what it cost. You've given me so much, Eleanor. You've opened up a whole new world for me. Every word I learned to read is a gift, and I wanted to give you something in return, something that would show you how much you mean to me." Eleanor set the book carefully aside and threw her arms around Cole's neck, kissing him with all the emotion swelling in her chest. He responded immediately, one hand coming up to tangle in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back, holding her close. The kiss was deep and searching, full of promise and longing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole took Eleanor's face in his hands and looked into her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. "I love you, Eleanor. I know it's fast and maybe I shouldn't say it yet, but I can't hold it in anymore. I love you. I love your passion and your intelligence and your kindness. I love the way you stand up for what you believe in even when everyone else thinks you're wrong. I love the way you look at books like they're treasures and the way you smile when you think I'm not watching. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Eleanor felt tears spill over and run down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too, Cole. I think I've loved you since the moment you walked into my schoolhouse and asked me to teach you. You see me for who I really am, and you love me anyway. You make me feel brave and beautiful and valued. I never thought I would find someone like you. You've got me now, and I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that." They stayed by the creek until full dark, wrapped in each other's arms and talking about the future. Cole told her he had been saving his wages carefully, adding to the small stake he had accumulated over years of work. In another year, maybe two, he would have enough to buy some land and start his own ranch. He wanted Eleanor to be part of that dream, to build a life with him. Eleanor listened with her heart full to bursting. For so long she had resigned herself to a life alone, convinced that no man would want a woman who valued books over domesticity. But Cole was different. He did not want to change her or dim her light. He wanted to build a life where they could both pursue their dreams, where her love of learning was seen as an asset rather than a liability. As they rode back to town under a sky full of stars, Eleanor leaned back against Cole's chest and allowed herself to imagine the future he had described. A small ranch with a house big enough for a family, a room lined with bookshelves where she could keep her growing collection, maybe even a small school where she could teach the children of neighboring ranchers. It was a beautiful dream, and for the first time, it felt within reach. The remainder of the summer passed in a haze of happiness. Eleanor and Cole continued their Sunday lessons, and Cole's reading improved by leaps and bounds. By early September, he could read simple passages from the primer with minimal help, and he had begun to tackle the first pages of Eleanor's beloved Shakespeare. Watching his face as he slowly worked his way through a sonnet, sounding out each word with careful concentration, filled Eleanor with a pride and joy that rivaled anything she had felt in her years of teaching. The town continued to gossip about them, but Eleanor found she truly did not care. She had Cole, and she had her work, and that was enough. Some of the townspeople had even begun to come around, particularly after it became known that Cole had stood up to a group of drifters who were harassing one of the shop girls. His reputation as a solid, dependable man grew, and with it came a grudging acceptance of his relationship with Eleanor. The school term began in mid-September, bringing 15 students of varying ages to Eleanor's classroom. She threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, inspired by her work with Cole to find new ways to make learning engaging and accessible. She incorporated more reading aloud into her lessons, choosing adventure stories and exciting tales that captured the children's imaginations. Several of the older boys, who had previously been indifferent students at best, began to show real interest in improving their reading skills. Cole sometimes stopped by the schoolhouse after his work was done, arriving dusty and tired, but always with a smile for Eleanor. The children adored him, particularly after he brought in a young foal from the ranch, and let them all take turns petting it while he explained the basics of horse training. Watching him with the students, patient and kind and genuinely interested in their questions, made Eleanor fall even more deeply in love with him. In October, Cole asked Eleanor to accompany him to the town's harvest dance, an annual event that marked the end of the farming season. Eleanor hesitated, knowing that attending such a public event together would be a clear declaration of their relationship to the entire community. But Cole looked at her with such hope in his eyes that she could not refuse. "I want everyone to know you're mine," he said simply. "I want to dance with you and hold you and not hide how I feel anymore. Will you come with me?" "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "I'll come." The night of the dance, Eleanor wore her best dress, the blue one with the embroidered flowers, and let her hair down in soft waves. When Cole arrived to collect her, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt with a string tie, his eyes widened with appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said, offering her his arm. "The prettiest girl in Wyoming." The dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that also served as a meeting place and occasional church when the weather was too poor for outdoor services. Someone had strung paper lanterns from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the room, and a small group of musicians had set up in one corner with a fiddle, a guitar, and a squeeze box. Tables lined the walls, laden with food brought by various families, and the center of the room had been left clear for dancing. Eleanor and Cole's entrance caused a noticeable ripple through the crowd. Conversations paused and heads turned to watch as they made their way into the room. Eleanor lifted her chin and held tight to Cole's arm, refusing to show any sign of discomfort. Cole, for his part, looked proud and possessive, his hand covering hers where it rested in the crook of his elbow. The music started, a lively reel, and Cole led Eleanor onto the dance floor. She had not danced in years, but the steps came back to her quickly, and Cole proved to be surprisingly graceful for such a large man. They swung and stepped and turned with the other couples, and Eleanor felt her self-consciousness melt away in the pure joy of movement and music. They danced several more times throughout the evening, alternating between fast reels and slower waltzes that let them hold each other close. During one of the waltzes, Cole pulled Eleanor tight against him and spoke softly in her ear. "I want to marry you, Eleanor. I know we haven't been courting long, but I'm sure. You're the only woman I've ever wanted, the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm home. Will you marry me?" Eleanor's heart seemed to stop and then start again at double speed. She pulled back just enough to look into Cole's face and saw the love and certainty written there. This was real, this was forever, this was everything she had ever wanted. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole's answering smile was brilliant. He spun her in a circle, lifting her briefly off her feet, and then kissed her right there in the middle of the dance floor with half of Redemption watching. There was a moment of shocked silence, and then Josephine Martinez began to clap. Others joined in, and soon the whole room was applauding and cheering. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and breathless, Eleanor saw that even some of the people who had been most critical of her were smiling. Perhaps it was the romance of the moment, or perhaps they had finally accepted that Eleanor and Cole belonged together. But whatever the reason, it felt like a blessing. They set a date for late November, after the school term's first quarter ended, and before the worst of winter set in. Eleanor wanted a simple ceremony, just a few friends gathered in the schoolhouse, but as word of the wedding spread, more and more people expressed interest in attending. Finally, they compromised on holding the ceremony in the town hall, with Reverend Thompson officiating and a reception to follow. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparation. Josephine insisted on making Eleanor's wedding dress, a beautiful creation of cream-colored wool with lace at the collar and cuffs. The other women of the town, many of whom had warmed to Eleanor after seeing her obvious happiness with Cole, contributed various items for her new household. She received quilts, dishes, preserves, and a beautiful set of embroidered pillowcases that must have taken hours to create. Cole, with help from some of the other ranch hands, built a small addition onto the back of the boarding house where he and Eleanor would live until he could afford to buy land for their ranch. It was just 2 rooms, a bedroom and a sitting room, but it was theirs, and Eleanor furnished it with care. Her books went on shelves Cole built specially for them, and she hung curtains in the windows and laid rugs on the floors to make it cozy. The night before the wedding, Eleanor lay awake in her bed at the schoolhouse for the last time, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. She was excited and nervous in equal measure, eager to begin her life as Cole's wife, but also aware that marriage would bring significant changes. She would have to give up the schoolhouse as her residence, though she would continue teaching. She would have responsibilities to Cole and eventually to the family they hoped to create, but more than the nervousness, she felt a deep, abiding peace. Cole loved her completely, respected her intelligence and her passions, and wanted to build a partnership rather than a hierarchy. With him, she could be her full self without fear of judgment or rejection. That was worth more than any security or social approval. The wedding day dawned cold but clear, with frost sparkling on the grass and a brilliant blue sky overhead. Eleanor dressed carefully with Josephine's help, her hands shaking as she fastened the tiny buttons that ran up the back of the dress. Josephine braided her hair into an intricate style, weaving in a few late-blooming wildflowers that Cole had picked that morning, and stepped back with tears in her eyes. "You are beautiful, Mija. Cole is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Eleanor said softly. "I never thought I would have this. A man who loves me, a place to belong, it feels like a dream." "It is not a dream. It is real and it is yours. Now come, we must get you to the town hall before your groom thinks you have changed your mind." The town hall was packed with people when Eleanor arrived. It seemed everyone in Redemption had turned out for the wedding, filling the benches and standing along the walls. Cole stood at the front with Reverend Thompson, dressed in a new suit that he must have ordered specially for the occasion. When he saw Eleanor, his face transformed with wonder and love, and she felt her own eyes fill with tears. She walked down the aisle alone, having no father or family member to give her away, but she did not feel lonely. Cole met her halfway, unable to wait for her to reach him, and took her hand to lead her the rest of the way to where the Reverend stood. The ceremony was short and sweet, the traditional words taking on new meaning as Eleanor and Cole spoke their vows to each other. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Cole cupped Eleanor's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the audience openly wept. The reception that followed was a joyful affair with music and dancing and more food than Eleanor had seen in one place since she left St. Louis. People congratulated them and offered advice and toasted their happiness with cups of punch. Even Virgil Tucker, who had started the whole affair by mocking Cole for his illiteracy, approached to shake Cole's hand and mumble an apology. As the afternoon wore on and the party began to wind down, Cole pulled Eleanor aside and whispered in her ear, "What do you say we slip away? I want to have you to myself for a while." Eleanor agreed eagerly, and they made their excuses to Josephine, who shooed them away with knowing smiles. They walked hand in hand through the cold November afternoon to their new home behind the boarding house. Cole carried Eleanor over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of their small sitting room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan," he said, and Eleanor felt a thrill run through her at the sound of her new name. "It has a nice ring to it," she agreed, sliding her arms around his neck. "Though I think I'll still go by Miss Hartwell at school, it would confuse the children otherwise. I don't care what you call yourself as long as you remember you're mine." "Always," Eleanor promised, and sealed the vow with a kiss. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom with the curtains drawn and a fire crackling in the small stove, Cole and Eleanor came together as husband and wife. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, full of whispered endearments and gentle exploration. Afterwards, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Cole's arms wrapped around Eleanor as she rested her head on his chest. "I love you," Cole murmured into her hair. "I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know that." "I love you too," Eleanor replied, pressing a kiss over his heart. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for wanting me exactly as I am. How could I want anything else? You're perfect." Eleanor drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, secure in the knowledge that she had found her home at last. Their first winter as a married couple was cold but happy. Eleanor continued to teach, walking from their rooms to the schoolhouse each morning and returning in the evenings to find Cole usually already home and waiting for her. They fell into comfortable routines, taking turns cooking meals and maintaining their small home. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Cole practicing his reading while Eleanor worked on mending or lesson plans. Cole's literacy improved steadily. By Christmas, he could read passages from Eleanor's books with only occasional help, stumbling over unfamiliar words but pushing through with determination. Eleanor gave him his own copy of Treasure Island for Christmas, knowing how much he loved adventure stories, and Cole spent hours poring over it, completely absorbed in the tale of pirates and hidden gold. In return, Cole gave Eleanor a beautiful wooden box he had made himself, perfectly sized to hold letters or small keepsakes. Inside, he had placed a letter he had written to her, the first one he had composed entirely on his own. The handwriting was still shaky, and several words were misspelled, but Eleanor treasured it more than any gift she had ever received. She kept it in the box along with the first letter Cole had ever written his name on, the wildflowers from her hair on their wedding day, and other small mementos of their courtship and marriage. As winter gave way to spring, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be certain before telling Cole, not wanting to raise his hopes prematurely. But by April, there was no doubt, and she shared the news with him one evening after supper. Cole's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy and lifted her into the air, spinning her around before setting her down carefully as though she were made of glass. We're having a baby, truly, truly. The baby should arrive sometime in October if my calculations are correct. October. That's perfect. I'll have time to save more money before the baby comes, and we can start looking for land in the spring. I want our child to grow up on our own ranch, Eleanor, with space to run and play and a real home. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. That sounds wonderful. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Eleanor continued teaching through the end of the school term in May, then spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Several of the ranch wives who had softened toward her over the past year stopped by to offer advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and supplies. Josephine was beside herself with excitement, treating Eleanor like a beloved daughter and fussing over her to make sure she was eating enough and resting properly. Cole was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted on doing all the heavy work around their home, refusing to let Eleanor lift anything heavier than a book. He brought her small gifts he found or made: a bouquet of wildflowers, a smooth river stone he thought was pretty, a little wooden rattle he had carved for the baby. Eleanor found his devotion both touching and occasionally exasperating, but she loved him all the more for it. In late October, as the aspen leaves turned gold and the air took on the crisp bite of approaching winter, Eleanor went into labor. Cole fetched the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered most of the babies in Redemption over the past 2 decades, and then proceeded to pace the floor of the sitting room while Eleanor labored in the bedroom. Josephine stayed with Eleanor, offering support and encouragement, while Cole wore a path in the floorboards with his worried walking. The labor lasted through the night and into the following morning. Just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Mrs. Henderson placed the squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Eleanor felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it took her breath away. This was her son, hers and Cole's, a perfect blend of both of them. Cole was invited in to meet his child, and the look on his face when he saw the baby was something Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and reached out one calloused finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers closed instinctively around Cole's finger, and Cole's eyes filled with tears. "He's perfect," Cole whispered. "Eleanor, he's absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never settled on anything definite. Looking at her son's face, Eleanor knew exactly what his name should be. "Matthew, it means gift of God, because he is a gift, Cole, the greatest gift we could ever receive." "Matthew Brennan," Cole said, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Matthew. Your mama and I are going to love you so much." The next few months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a tiny human being. Eleanor had thought she understood love before Matthew was born, but she quickly realized that the love she felt for her child was different in quality and intensity from anything she had experienced. It was primal and fierce, a love that would make her fight tigers or walk through fire to keep him safe. Cole proved to be a devoted father. He would sit for hours holding Matthew, reading to him from Eleanor's books even though the baby was far too young to understand the words. He changed nappies without complaint and walked the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rumbling voice until the baby quieted. Watching Cole with their son made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. By the time Matthew was 6 months old, Cole had saved enough money to make a down payment on a piece of land about 10 miles outside of Redemption. It was not large, only 80 acres, but it had good water, decent grazing, and a small cabin that needed work but was structurally sound. The day Cole took Eleanor out to see it, riding together on his horse with Matthew tucked in a sling against Eleanor's chest, she felt her heart swell with hope and possibility. "It's not much yet," Cole said as they stood in front of the cabin, which was little more than a one-room shack with a leaky roof and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. "But I can fix it up. Add rooms, repair the roof, build a porch. In a few years, we'll have a real home here. What do you think? Eleanor looked around at the rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers, the mountains rising in the distance, the creek that ran through the property providing water year-round. She thought about raising Matthew here, about teaching him to read under the big cottonwood tree near the creek, about perhaps having more children to fill the house with laughter and life. She thought about growing old with Cole in this place, building something lasting and good. I think it's perfect, she said. I think this is exactly where we're meant to be. They moved to the ranch in early summer after the school term ended. The Redemption School Board had been understanding when Eleanor informed them she would not be returning to teach in the fall, focusing instead on raising her family and helping Cole establish their ranch. They hired a new teacher, a young man fresh from a teacher's college back east, and Eleanor spent several days showing him the schoolhouse and explaining the quirks of her various students. Saying goodbye to the schoolhouse was harder than Eleanor had expected. She had spent so much of her life within those walls, first learning to survive without her father and then building a new life for herself. But as she closed the door for the last time and walked away with Cole and Matthew, she felt no real sadness. She was not losing anything. She was simply moving forward into the next chapter of her story. Life on the ranch was demanding but satisfying. Cole worked from dawn to dusk, repairing the cabin, building fences, and breaking horses to sell to neighboring ranchers. Eleanor took care of Matthew, maintained their home, and tended a large vegetable garden that would help feed them through the winter. When Matthew napped, she would sometimes sit on the porch Cole had built and read from her beloved books, the same ones that had sustained her through so many lonely years. But she was not lonely anymore. She had Cole, who still looked at her with the same love and admiration he had shown from the beginning. She had Matthew, who grew more delightful every day, developing a personality that was equal parts curiosity and mischief. She had a home she could truly call her own, built through hard work and dedication. She had everything she had ever dreamed of and more. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Cole's skill with horses became known throughout the region, and he always had more work than he could handle. They added a small herd of cattle, then some chickens for eggs, then a milk cow. The cabin expanded room by room as Cole's savings allowed, until it was a proper four-room house with a kitchen, a sitting room, and 2 bedrooms. Eleanor lined one wall of the sitting room with shelves for her books, which continued to grow as Cole made sure to bring her something new whenever he went to town. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic little boy with his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's quick mind. By the time he was 4, he was already learning his letters, sitting on Eleanor's lap as she pointed to each one and told him what sound it made. Cole would join these lessons sometimes, making a game of it to see who could remember more words, father or son. Matthew would collapse in giggles when Cole deliberately got an answer wrong, and Eleanor would watch the two of them with her heart full to overflowing. When Matthew was 5, Eleanor became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and fatigue, but Eleanor endured it knowing the gift that awaited at the end. In the spring of 1885, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Eleanor's mother. Sarah had dark hair like Eleanor and a calm, observant nature that was a stark contrast to Matthew's exuberance. With 2 children, life became even busier. Cole hired a young ranch hand named Tommy to help with the work, freeing up some time for him to spend with his growing family. Eleanor's days were full of cooking, cleaning, gardening, and childcare, but she had never been happier. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, she and Cole would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, holding hands and talking about their day. Do you ever miss it? Cole asked one evening. Teaching, I mean, having your own income and independence, Eleanor considered the question carefully. Sometimes I miss the students, she admitted. I liked watching children discover the joy of reading and learning, but I don't miss the loneliness. And I'm teaching Matthew and Sarah, which is just as rewarding in its own way. No, I don't regret the choice I made. This life we've built together is everything I ever wanted. Good, because I couldn't do any of this without you. You're the heart of this family, Eleanor. You know that, right? We're the heart of it, together. Cole leaned over and kissed her softly. Together, he agreed. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and thrive. Cole's reputation as a horseman spread, and people came from as far as Montana and Colorado to buy horses he had trained. He took on another ranch hand, then another, until they had a small operation that provided a comfortable living for the family. The house expanded again to accommodate 3 more children: William in 1887, James in 1889, and finally little Elizabeth in 1891. Eleanor's hands were full with 5 children, but she managed to carve out time each day for reading and learning. She taught all the children their letters and numbers, instilling in them the same love of books that she possessed. The sight of her children sitting around the kitchen table with their slates and primers, tongues poking out in concentration as they practiced their writing, never failed to make her smile. Matthew proved to be particularly gifted academically. By the time he was 10, he was reading books that would challenge many adults, and he showed a natural aptitude for mathematics that reminded Eleanor of her own father. Cole was enormously proud, though he made sure to praise all the children equally for their individual talents. Sarah had a gift for drawing and could capture a likeness with just a few strokes of her pencil. William loved animals and could gentle even the wildest colt with patience and kindness. James was mechanically minded and could fix anything that broke. And little Elizabeth, though only 3, showed signs of inheriting her mother's storytelling ability, spinning elaborate tales about her dolls and their adventures. One summer evening when Matthew was 12, he approached Eleanor with a serious expression on his face. "Mama, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "I want to go to a real school, in town, I mean. I love learning from you, but I want to study more advanced subjects, mathematics and science and literature, things you can't teach me here." Eleanor felt a pang in her chest. She had known this day would come, had even been preparing for it in her own mind, but it was still difficult to hear. Matthew was growing up, developing his own dreams and ambitions that would take him beyond the ranch. But she also felt pride that she had raised a son who valued education so highly. "Let me talk to your father," she said. "We'll figure something out." That night, after the children were all asleep, Eleanor broached the subject with Cole. To her relief, he agreed immediately that Matthew should have the opportunity for more formal schooling. They discussed the options and decided that Matthew could board in town during the week with Josephine, who was still running her boarding house at the age of 75, and come home on weekends. It would mean a financial sacrifice, paying for both the schooling and Matthew's room and board, but they both agreed it was worth it. Matthew thrived at the Redemption School, quickly becoming the top student in his class. The teacher, the same young man who had replaced Eleanor years earlier, wrote to tell them that Matthew had exceptional potential and should consider applying to a university when he was old enough. Eleanor read the letter to Cole with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed with pride for her son. The other children followed Matthew's path when they were old enough, each attending school in town while still helping with ranch work on weekends and during the summer. Eleanor found that having the older children away during the week gave her more time to focus on the younger ones, and she treasured the weekends when the whole family was together. As the 1890s progressed, Wyoming changed rapidly. The open range disappeared as more ranchers fenced their property. The railroad expanded, bringing goods and people from the east with increasing frequency. Redemption grew from a small frontier town into a thriving community with paved streets, electric lights, and all the amenities of modern civilization. Eleanor sometimes marveled at how different the world was from the harsh, isolated place she had known when she first arrived. But some things remained constant. Her love for Cole had only deepened over the years, maturing from the passionate romance of their youth into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and deep affection. They still held hands on the porch during summer evenings. They still kissed each other goodbye every morning and hello every evening. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing, finishing each other's sentences and sharing private jokes that no one else would understand. Cole had become a respected member of the community, known for his integrity and his skill. He served on the town council and helped mediate disputes between ranchers. He had also never stopped reading, working his way through Eleanor's entire collection, and then buying more books to feed his growing appetite for knowledge. He particularly loved history and biography, devouring accounts of famous battles and great leaders with the same enthusiasm he had once reserved for adventure stories. Eleanor, too, had found new roles beyond mother and wife. She wrote occasional articles for the Redemption newspaper about education and child rearing. She organized a women's reading circle that met monthly to discuss books and current events. She volunteered at the church, teaching Sunday school and helping organize community events. She had become exactly what the younger version of herself, mocked for reading in the street, had never dared dream she could be. A woman who was respected and valued for her mind as well as her domestic skills. In the summer of 1899, Matthew left for the University of Wyoming in Laramie, the first member of either Eleanor's or Cole's family to attend college. Watching him ride away in the stagecoach, his belongings packed in a trunk and his eyes bright with excitement, Eleanor felt both pride and sorrow. Her little boy had grown into a fine young man, confident and intelligent and ready to take on the world, but she would miss him terribly. "He'll be fine," Cole said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as the stagecoach disappeared from view. "We raised him right. He's got a good head on his shoulders and a strong sense of who he is. He'll make us proud." "I know," Eleanor said, leaning into her husband's solid warmth. "I just wish they didn't have to grow up quite so fast. That's the way of things. We raise them to leave us, and if we've done our job right, they do, but they always come back. This ranch will always be home to them, no matter where they go." Cole's words proved prophetic. Matthew did come back, every summer and holiday break, full of stories about his classes and his friends and the incredible things he was learning. Sarah followed him to university 2 years later, planning to study art. William stayed on the ranch, having no desire for formal education beyond what Eleanor had given him, and began learning the business from Cole with an eye to eventually taking over. James went to a technical school to study engineering, and little Elizabeth, who was not so little anymore at 12 years old, announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother had been. In 1902, as the new century settled in, Eleanor and Cole celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the region. Josephine came, now nearly 80 but still sharp as a tack, and regaled everyone with stories of how she had known from the moment she met Cole and Eleanor that they were meant for each other. As Eleanor looked around at the gathering, at her children grown and growing, at her husband standing beside her with silver threading through his wheat-colored hair, at the ranch they had built together from nothing, she felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago when she stood in the street of Redemption clutching her book while people mocked her. Not just love, though that was certainly part of it, but belonging, purpose. A place where she could be fully herself without apology or explanation. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, slipping his hand into hers as he had done countless times over the years. "I'm thinking about how that day you walked into my schoolhouse and asked me to teach you to read changed my entire life. If you hadn't had the courage to admit you couldn't read, if you hadn't seen value in learning, we might never have found each other. "Oh, I think we would have found each other eventually," Cole said with a smile. "Some things are just meant to be, but I'm grateful it happened the way it did." "Every day with you has been a gift, Eleanor. Every single day. Even the hard ones. The times when we were struggling to make ends meet, or when the children were sick, or when the winter was so harsh we thought we might not make it through, especially those times. Because we faced them together and we came through stronger. You're my partner in every sense of the word, Eleanor. My best friend, my lover, the mother of my children, my teacher. You're everything." Eleanor reached up and cupped Cole's face in her hands, looking into those blue-gray eyes that had captivated her from the very first moment. She saw in them the young cowboy who had been brave enough to admit his vulnerability, the devoted father who had read bedtime stories to children too young to understand them, the man who had worked himself to exhaustion to provide for his family, and the husband who had loved her without reservation for 2 decades. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I don't know what I would do without you." "You'll never have to find out," Cole promised. "We're going to grow old together, you and I. We're going to watch our children have children of their own, and we're going to sit on that porch when we're too creaky to do much else and read to each other from those books you love so much. We have years and years ahead of us, Eleanor, a whole lifetime still to live." And they did. They watched Matthew graduate from university and become a lawyer, then marry a lovely young woman named Catherine and present them with their first grandchild. They saw Sarah establish herself as a respected artist, her paintings hanging in galleries in Denver and San Francisco. They helped William expand the ranch to twice its original size, and cheered when he married a rancher's daughter from the next county. They celebrated when James patented an improved windmill design that made him modestly wealthy, and they wept with joy when Elizabeth got her teaching certificate and took a position at the Redemption School, teaching in the same building where Eleanor had once worked. Through it all, through the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and tragedies, the mundane routines and the extraordinary moments, Eleanor and Cole remained devoted to each other. They were partners in the truest sense, facing life together with courage and humor and an unwavering commitment to their shared dreams. On a sunny afternoon in the spring of 1920, Eleanor sat on the porch of the ranch house with Cole beside her. They were both in their 60s now, their hair silver and their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. Eleanor held a book in her lap, a new novel she had ordered from a catalog, while Cole whittled a small wooden horse for one of their many grandchildren. "Read to me," Cole asked, setting down his whittling knife and reaching for Eleanor's hand. Eleanor smiled and opened the book, beginning to read aloud in the same clear voice she had used to teach him his letters so many years ago. Cole listened with his eyes closed, his thumb rubbing small circles on the back of her hand, and Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had been mocked for reading books, called odd and unmarriageable, treated as though her love of learning was a character defect. But then a cowboy had walked into her schoolhouse and said, "Teach me everything you know starting now," and everything had changed. That simple request had sparked a romance that had sustained them through decades of marriage. It had built a family, a home, a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. As the afternoon sun slanted across the porch and the mountains rose majestic in the distance, Eleanor continued to read, secure in the knowledge that she had found exactly what she had been searching for. Love, home, a place to belong. And all because she had been brave enough to teach, and Cole had been brave enough to learn. Years continued to pass in gentle succession. The ranch became a gathering place for their growing family, with children and grandchildren visiting regularly to seek advice, share news, or simply enjoy the peaceful beauty of the place Cole and Eleanor had built. The house that had started as a one-room cabin now sprawled comfortably across the land, with additions and improvements made over the decades reflecting the love and care invested in it. Eleanor's collection of books had grown to fill an entire room, a library that was the pride of the household. She had never stopped acquiring new volumes, and Cole had never stopped reading them. Many of their grandchildren's fondest memories would be of sitting in that book-lined room listening to their grandfather read aloud, his once strong voice growing softer with age but never losing its warmth. In 1925, the town of Redemption held a celebration for its 50th anniversary. As part of the festivities, they honored citizens who had made significant contributions to the community. Eleanor and Cole were among those recognized, praised for their dedication to education, their generosity to neighbors in need, and their example of a strong, loving marriage. When they stood together to accept the community's appreciation, Eleanor thought back to the young woman she had been, standing alone in the street while people mocked her, and marveled at how far she had come. "I never thought I would belong here," she whispered to Cole as they took their seats after the ceremony. "I thought I would always be the strange woman who loved books too much." "You do love books too much," Cole teased gently, "but that's one of the many things I love about you. You taught this town that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. You showed them that a woman can be intelligent and educated and still be a wonderful wife and mother. You changed minds, Eleanor, mine first and then everyone else's." That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Eleanor and Cole renewed their wedding vows in a small ceremony at the ranch. It was Elizabeth's idea, a way to celebrate not just their years together, but the love that had sustained them through all of life's challenges. As they spoke the familiar words, promising to love and cherish each other for as long as they both lived, Eleanor felt the same flutter of excitement in her chest that she had felt on their wedding day nearly 43 years earlier. The 1920s gave way to the 1930s, bringing with them economic hardship and drought. The Great Depression hit Wyoming hard, and many ranchers lost everything. But the Brennan Ranch survived, partly due to Cole's careful management and partly due to the strong network of family and community that helped them weather the worst of it. Eleanor organized relief efforts, coordinating donations of food and clothing for those who had lost their livelihoods. Cole hired men when he could afford to, giving them work and dignity even when the ranch barely broke even. Through it all, their love remained constant. They had learned long ago that material prosperity mattered far less than having someone to share life with, and they faced the hard years with the same partnership that had seen them through previous challenges. When Cole's health began to fail in his early 70s, Eleanor cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. And when Eleanor's eyesight dimmed, making it difficult for her to read the books she loved, Cole read to her for hours every day, giving back the gift she had given him so long ago. On a crisp autumn morning in 1938, Cole Brennan passed away peacefully in his sleep, Eleanor's hand clasped in his. He was 76 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Eleanor was devastated by the loss, but also grateful for the nearly 40 years they had shared. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming, she stood to speak about the man she had loved. "Cole Brennan came to me when he was a young cowboy who couldn't read," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He asked me to teach him, and in doing so, he taught me what real courage looks like. It takes bravery to admit you don't know something, to ask for help, to be vulnerable." Cole had that bravery in abundance. He also had kindness, integrity, humor, and a capacity for love that transformed everyone around him. "He transformed me. I was a lonely woman mocked for her love of books, and he saw in me something worth treasuring. He made me believe in myself and in the possibility of happiness. Every day I spent as his wife was a gift, and I will treasure those memories until I join him." Eleanor lived for another 8 years after Cole's death, spending her final years surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still reading when her eyes would allow it, still offering wisdom and guidance to those who sought it. She watched with pride as her descendants carried forward the values she and Cole had instilled. Love of learning, dedication to family, respect for hard work, and above all, kindness toward others. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1946, just a few weeks after her 88th birthday. She was buried next to Cole on a hillside overlooking the ranch, beneath a headstone that read, "Eleanor Hartwell Brennan, teacher, wife, mother, friend, she taught us all to reach for more." At her funeral, Elizabeth stood to speak about her mother, just as Eleanor had spoken about Cole years before. "My mother loved books," Elizabeth said, "but more than that, she loved the worlds that books opened up. She loved learning and growing and challenging herself. When the people of this town mocked her for that love, my father saw it as something precious. He asked her to teach him everything she knew, and she did. But the greatest lesson they taught was not about reading or writing or any academic subject. It was about love. They taught us that real love means accepting someone completely, supporting their dreams, and building a life together based on respect and partnership. They showed us that two people who seem unlikely together can create something beautiful and lasting. My parents' love story is one I will tell my children and grandchildren, a reminder that the best relationships are built on a foundation of genuine understanding and shared growth." The ranch remained in the Brennan family for generations, a testament to the life Cole and Eleanor had built together. The library Eleanor had created became a cherished space where each new generation discovered the magic of books. Many of her descendants would go on to become teachers, carrying forward her passion for education. Others became ranchers like Cole, working the land with the same dedication he had shown. But all of them carried within them the legacy of that chance meeting in a schoolhouse in 1878, when a cowboy had asked a lonely woman to teach him to read, and in doing so had changed both their lives forever. The story of Eleanor and Cole became a treasured family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. It was a reminder that sometimes the things that make us different, the things others mock or misunderstand, are the very things that will lead us to our greatest happiness. Eleanor's love of books, once a source of ridicule, had brought her the man who would become her partner, her best friend, and the love of her life. And Cole's willingness to admit his limitations and seek help had given him not just literacy but a family, a home, and a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. In the end, theirs was a simple story. Two people who found each other at the right moment, who chose to build something together, and who loved each other through all the joys and sorrows that life brought. It was a story of courage, both in admitting weakness and in staying true to oneself. It was a story of transformation, as they both became more than they had been alone. And above all, it was a story of love, deep, abiding, transformative love that proved stronger than mockery, hardship, or even death. The schoolhouse in Redemption, where it all began, eventually became a museum, preserved as an example of frontier education. Visitors could see the desk where Eleanor had taught her lessons, the shelves where she had kept her precious books, and the slate on which Cole had first practiced his letters. A plaque told their story, how a woman mocked for reading books had found love with a cowboy who said, "Teach me everything you know, starting now," and how that moment had blossomed into a lifetime of happiness. And so their story lived on, inspiring others to embrace their passions, to be brave enough to ask for help, to see value in those who are different, and above all, to believe in the transformative power of love. It was a reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with a simple request, that education can change lives in ways both practical and profound, and that sometimes the person we least expect becomes the one we cannot live without. Eleanor and Cole's love story proved that in the wild, untamed landscape of the American West, where survival often took precedence over sentiment, there was still room for romance, growth, and the kind of deep connection that transcends time and circumstance. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they had helped build. A testament to what two people can achieve when they face life together with courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to each other's dreams.